In today's episode, I have a far-ranging conversation with legendary character actor Stephen Tobolowsky. You're going to recognize him immediately. He's been in literally hundreds of movies and TV shows. And to say that he's had colorful stories about his adventures in Hollywood is an understatement. And we also get into his adventures with God, the subject of his new book.
Accidental Talmudist wisdom you don't want to miss. Now my pal Sal, take it away.
Welcome to the Accidental Talmudist podcast. My guest today is Stephen Tobolowsky, or shall I say, legendary actor and author, Stephen Tobolowsky. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, the legendary sounds good. You know, but it also kind of makes me feel I'm a little closer to death. So you can just call me Stephen.
Okay, we'll go with Stephen. I guess
or
if you
Dr. Tobolowsky.
are you? Oh, you're now an honorary doctor.
I am an honorary doctor, and I didn't
Mazel
know
tov.
this was a bad thing. Now everybody who I know who is a doctor who got it the real way.
Yeah.
I gave a speech at a graduation, so they made me an honorary doctor of something. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And people hate me now.
They resent you.
They resent me because I got the honorary doctorate.
I think it's great to have an honorary doctorate unless you prescribe medicine.
I'll keep away from that.
But I think in terms of legendary, I think it should be applied to you in all cases. But what will be interesting is if you're writing your own resume, do you put legendary in there?
Now, this is a big deal. When you become legendary, as apparently I am, you don't write your resume anymore.
There's no more resume.
No more resume. You walk into a casting office, they know who you are because you are legendary.
Thank God.
Thank God.
What was that story with they wanted her to read for a part, and she came in and put her Oscar on the table.
It
So here's my audition.
It sounds like Rita Moreno. I mean, it could be. But yeah, no.
It was for the Poseidon Adventure, and it was I'm spacing the actress who she got it for A Place in the Sun.
Oh, Shelley Winters.
It was Shelley Winters, yes.
Oh, Shelley Winters. I did a movie with Shelley Winters called The Pickle, and we shot in New York, and Shelley wanted me to walk her from the set to her hotel. And as we walked through downtown New York, she entertained me by pointing to every building we passed and who she slept with in that building. Oh, this is... Yeah, Danny Thomas right over there. Kirk Douglas. It was amazing. But Shelley Winters, I worked with her, of course, near the end of her career. She's a brilliant actress. When you are on camera with her, you realize you're out of your depth. She's so good.
She was legendary.
She was really legendary.
She embodied it. All right, so as you can see already, we're not going to be terribly organized as we move through the topic being you.
This was fairly
This podcast.
systematic, I thought. I don't know.
But I would like to open with a quote from your book. Now, I got to say, I love your book.
Oh, thank you.
I am writing a spiritual memoir, and I actually purchased your book as an example to learn from before I met you, so that when we met you at that legendary dinner in a sukkah, I said, oh, my God, I have his book on my night table. This is the coolest thing ever. But let me just do this little quote. Near the end of your book, you say, I have believed in many things in my life. I have believed in monsters, in ambition, in science, in nothing, in love, in the Beatles, and for a brief period of time, in mulching. I have believed in time machines and growing my own food. I raised chickens for a few weeks until my neighbors threatened to have me arrested. You can understand a lot about a person by understanding what they believe. You can understand a lot about an age by what was considered believable in that age. So why don't we open by me asking you, what do you believe in today?
Today, well, seeing your face here, seeing Nina over there, ready to give you notes, I am constantly brought back to my faith, 100%, and it gets stronger every day. So I absolutely believe in Judaism, believe in God, and in my faith. That's something I really believe in. I absolutely believe that there's nothing more curative than love, and nothing more important than forgiveness. Everybody is always asking me now about the Me Too movement and all of these kind of things, and is anyone going to be able, is their career going to be able to come back from this? And I said, it's all a question of redemption and forgiveness. And I believe in that 100%, that people have to own their lives, and they have to find some way to reach a higher road and not the lower road.
Now, would you say that's a belief that has come upon you or that you've chosen?
It's come upon me because I see the other things don't work. I think I'm 67 or 68, I can't remember. I was born in 51. I'm one of those. And I've almost been killed several times. I was held hostage at gunpoint in a grocery store. I was almost killed by someone who was my next door neighbor. He put a gun in my face. I broke my neck in Iceland riding a horse on the side of an active volcano. And I had open heart
And may have been dead.
I
for
may
a
have
brief
been
time.
dead. I may have been.
Yeah.
And I had open heart surgery. And when you come close to the Grim Reaper, over and over again, you realize all the things that haven't worked. And I know, here's one that I believed in before. I think that was on my list. Ambition doesn't really work.
Okay.
It works in the short term, earlier in your life. It gets you through all those periods of time in which you don't have belief in yourself, but you have belief in the power of your ambition. So I know ambition doesn't really get you to the finish line, but I know for a fact love does. Oh boy, I am rewarded with that every day with my wife, Anne.
Yeah, I think a lot of your book is a love letter to Anne, and it's very sweet. And we know Anne, and so we can see why you would write a love letter to Anne. But in the list that you just gave of being near to death, sometimes you were near to your own death, and sometimes you were just near death. So you mentioned you were born in 51. That made you 12 when it was 1963 in Dallas. And you wrote that obviously the Kennedy assassination happened that month, that year, while you were growing up in Dallas. And it seemed like Dallas came under attack from the rest of the United States.
It was one of the, of course, the murder of the president was shocking to us. Nothing like that had ever happened. It was outside of our experience. But what was really outside of our experience was what terrified me personally was the national press and their attack on the city of Dallas. And there were headlines in national magazines, should Dallas even exist? And as a 12-year-old, I was going like, oh no, what are they going to do to me? It was what became almost science fiction with the murder of Kennedy, became existential loss when the national press was saying this should be the end of Dallas, that Dallas was just nothing but harboring hatred and I guess Nazism at the time. And I guess it's kind of true. I do
Was Oswald even a citizen of Dallas?
I don't know if he was he was probably a citizen of Russia at the time.
Right.
But I was just back home in Dallas, and they still have his house there with the sign in front, for rent, room for rent, over there on Beckley Avenue where my father used to work. It's still there, and it's probably they're charging tickets for it now. But it was so scary to have your hometown be mentioned, being put on some sort of list for obliteration. And as a child, I didn't know how to combat this. And of course, at that time, we thought the murder of the president was a one-off event. And that was before Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And then we began to see, oh my gosh, this is going to be part of the fabric of our civilization. And fortunately, that sort of thread in the tapestry of American life kind of stopped.
And may it stay stopped.
May it stay stopped.
But let's just jump forward for a moment. We'll come back to your youth. But another time that you brushed up against death, and this give us a little bit of an insight into, well, let's say this is 20 years ago, so this other part of your life. Now you're living in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
You're married to Anne. You're living in the Valley. And you reconnect with Judaism. And you find yourself praying on Saturdays with your friend and legendary comedian Larry Miller. And a shady character comes into Shabbat services one morning.
It's hard to tell who a shady character is on Shabbat services, because
sometimes we're the shady characters.
Yeah, we're the shady characters. You come in, and it was a fellow who was kind of overweight and had blue jeans and kind of a flannel shirt, looking not unlike I look today, except somewhat bigger. And this was at the time. This was so interesting because I have been mocked by people who don't know the value of tradition for being a traditionalist. I am a traditionalist, and so I was just learning all the multiple traditions that are involved with Judaism again, about the talit and
the prayer shawl.
The prayer shawl. That's the prayer shawl, and the order of the prayer service on Saturday, and when we read the prayers, and when we read the Torah.
And Hebrew itself.
And Hebrew itself. I'm going through all of that again. And this fellow came in, and he walked in the back door right before the Torah service. So I'm figuring, he's probably trying to get here in time to make a minyan for the Torah service in case we didn't have a
Not
minyan.
atypical that Jews come late to
come
synagogue.
late, and especially for Torah service. So he came on, he put a yarmulke on his head, but when he got the prayer shawl, he didn't put it on right. He wrapped it around his neck like a scarf, like he's in New York and he's going to walk out on the street. And he didn't say the prayer over it, and he just wrapped it around his neck, and I went, that's odd. Now, Larry and I were Gabayim that day, which means we are standing on each side of the Torah, and we are supposed to help the reader with where they are in the reading, which meant that's what Larry was going to do, because Larry knows Hebrew, and I was going to stand there and
But you're essentially on a stage in front of an audience,
Yes.
so you can't just whisper to your neighbor. You're doing something.
I'm doing something, and I have a clear view of our little congregation.
Right.
So we have the Torah out. We're saying the Torah blessings, and our visitor, who did not know how to put on the prayer shawl, pulls out the prayer book and not the Torah, which we had. Everybody has a prayer book and a Torah. So he didn't know where we were in the service. And he starts thumbing through the pages without looking down at the book. And this made the little hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. The traditionalist in me said, there's something ain't kosher about this guy.
This is an interloper.
Yeah, this is something odd. So I whispered to Larry. I said, I crossed around the Torah. I whispered to him, something's wrong. I'm going to check. And I left the bima, the little stage of the Torah, went into the men's room, which I knew had a side door outside the synagogue, and there was a red truck parked in the no parking place in front of the Torah. So in front of the synagogue. So I'm thinking, this guy is a non-traditionalist in many ways. Mm-hmm. So I look in the back of this truck, and then I felt like I was in some sort of Stephen King novel. It was terrifying. There were days and days of old chicken dinners, like from Colonel Sanders, like bones, just all over the back. And there were newspapers and magazines and old blankets. And it was
not that a guy's living in his car, but he's just creepy in his car.
Creepy in his car. He's spending way too much time in his car.
Right.
I came back in and whispered to Larry, this guy's not right. And came back over, and Larry fixed this guy with the stare that I mentioned in the book, comedians give to hecklers when they're on stage.
Yes.
So Larry's given this guy the stink eye as we're doing the Torah service, and our interloper gets up, leaves the prayer shawl there, and runs out of the synagogue. And I'm thinking, this is no big deal until I believe it was at the JCC.
3 days later.
3 days later, and was it in Chatsworth? No. He shot
Granada Hills.
JCC. Interloper came in armed with weapons, shot several people in the JCC, later killed a postman who had nothing to do with Judaism, but he was not white, and vanished. And I'd never connected the two until I'm watching television. And they have a picture of the guy's face who shot up the JCC, and it was the interloper who had come into our Torah service probably to shoot us up. Probably all the blankets in the back of his truck had weapons in them, and we were such small potatoes that we had barely had a minion, and he needed more Jews to kill.
Yeah.
And what was remarkable is that he went into that JCC, and there were so many kids there. And the FBI said that they had found explosives in the back of his truck, rounds and rounds and rounds of ammunition and guns, but he only shot like 5 people and left. And what I find is so compelling to me about the story, he escaped. First of all, he left the red truck behind, which is good. I mean, a red truck filled with explosives and ammunition is a surefire thing for the cops, with out-of-state plates, yes. He took a series of cab rides so he couldn't be tracked to Las Vegas, like $800 in cab rides, I believe is what the article said. And then for some reason, he turned himself in to the FBI.
He had gotten away.
He had gotten away. He was free.
Yeah.
He walked into the FBI office in Las Vegas and said, "I'm the guy you're looking for. I'm the guy who killed all those kids." Well, he obviously didn't know he didn't kill all those kids, but he shot them up. But why? The question came to me, why? He pre-planned evil. He came from Oregon to California to not be in his home state. He picked out a target. He was successful to a certain extent, and then he was free. But he turned himself in.
Yeah.
Now, it could have been just ego of saying, like, hey, I did this. I want my name in the paper. But I happen to think that it was something more, too, that it's a component of the human soul to make contrition when we and I think we don't necessarily
So
know.
you're saying that he's not a sociopath. This guy had some kind of a conscience.
It's one theory. It's an alternate theory.
Right.
I mean, there is a theory that, he's just crazy. Another theory that he was a white supremacist and he felt he would probably have more people he could kill in prison. So he wanted to go to prison. But the alternate theory is, even though we've been on this earth as humankind for hundreds of thousands of years, and now archaeologists believe that man reached for the spiritual part of his life way before we even thought that man did, that they found spiritual artifacts that go back, way more than 50,000 years, which is where they originally thought man latched onto the spiritual. Maybe we are like Hamlet. There is more in heaven and earth that is in your philosophy, Horatio. That maybe we are made up of components that we are not aware of, like my Apple phone. I have no idea how that thing works. It's made up of components that I am not aware of. And I think that's the same thing true of the human soul, I think, but I'm an optimist. But he ended up dying in prison. This fellow died in prison.
Right, and when you came to the end of that story, what your thought was, what your comment was, because he sought forgiveness, right? And it was not granted to him. The parents whose children suffered, the family of the victim that he killed, did not forgive him. And then you commented, forgiveness has no intrinsic value. As it's a Jewish teaching, that forgiveness in itself is not a good. Forgiveness can be used for a good, like money, right? Money has no intrinsic moral worth. It can be used to create good. It can be used to pursue evil.
Right.
And forgiveness has a similar quality.
Yes. And
that flies in the face, flies in the face of the American conception in the culture. No, forgiveness is always good. Forgiveness is a good.
Yeah, and I love in Joseph Telushkin's book about classic Jewish beliefs, where he brings up the formula for forgiveness in classical Judaism, that you have to be contrite. You have to mention it to the person that you have wronged. You have to be able to make restitution. And this is why all this thing that happens in our country a lot of times, someone murders someone and some church or congregation on the other side of the country that has no connection to it says, well, we forgive them. In classic Judaism, you can't. In fact, parents cannot even forgive a murder if someone murders their child.
Right.
Because the soul belongs to the child, not to the parents, according to Maimonides. So Telushkin brings out that there are certain crimes that there is no forgiveness for. And one of them is murder, because there is no way to restore a life. Another one is adultery. Whoops. Because you cannot restore a family. And the third, which shocked me, was gossip, because you cannot restore a reputation. Fascinating. But yeah, this guy was not forgiven.
And enough said about him.
Yeah.
Another character that comes up in your book, and on the subject of forgiveness, it made me think of him because there was a story, I think it was last year, a couple of years ago, about a woman who's a Holocaust survivor who decided that she would forgive, I don't know if all Nazis or Hitler, but some Nazi that killed many, many Jews. And she said, well, it's my business. I'm a survivor. If I want to forgive, I can forgive. And other survivors said, who are you to forgive a monster who killed so much of my family? I personally lost my grandfather. My grandmother lost so much of her family. And I definitely had mixed feelings listening to her story. Now, I think that someone can say, as you said, you can forgive a wrong done to you. You cannot forgive a wrong done to others. And then in your book, you have this wonderful character, Abe, who became such an important guy in your life. So why don't you tell us a bit about him?
Yeah, Abe was I guess I met Abe through loss, right? I began going to morning minions because I'm an actor, which meant even though I am legendary at times, I am often unemployed. And so
legendarily unemployed.
Yes. So I had the opportunity to mourn my mother with 11, well, actually probably more like 2 years. I was able to go to morning and evening minion, and you become very close to those people that you share the minion with. And Abe, and Manny, and Leonard, I had such respect for them because they weren't there mourning anyone. They were there because they knew how important it was to say the Kaddish and how difficult it was to make a minion in the morning because Starbucks has taken away the number of people who are willing to pray in the morning.
Okay.
So they were Abe was one of the guys who was just there to make the minion. And I remember he came up to me. I had relearned the Kaddish to do the prayer.
Just to clarify for the audience, the Kaddish is the Jewish prayer of mourning. To say it out loud, to say it at all, you need a quorum of 10.
Yes.
And without that, the mourner can't say Kaddish. So this is a very important service that these guys do to gather every morning to make sure there's a minyan for mourners who need it.
Yes. And I was so nervous that first day to say Kaddish because Hebrew was not my first or second or third language. And so I had learned this prayer, and I stood up, and at the end, this old man who probably weighed 89 pounds soaking wet with rolls of quarters in his pocket, came shoveling over to me and goes, "Hello, I'm Abe. My name is Abe. You are..." He said, "You're saying a prayer for your mother." And I said, "How did you know?" He said, "It was the way you said the prayer, because I could tell it was not for your wife, or God forbid it was not for a child." And I said, "Yes." So we became friends, minion buddies, which did not mean we really socialized. We met in the morning for an hour, we met in the evening for an hour, and that was it. One day, Abe came up to me and said, "Mr. T, today I'm celebrating." And I go, "What?" He says, "Well, you want to come to breakfast with me?" I go, "Sure, Abe. What are we celebrating?" And he pulled up his sleeve, and there were the numbers tattooed on his arm from Auschwitz. He says, "You ever seen this before?" I said, "Not for real." And he says, "Oh, let me tell you, buddy, this is for real. This is the last day you will see this number. This is what I'm celebrating." He says, "I go to this Iranian doctor, very good doctor, Iranian. I have a little spot on my head." And he pulls down his hat, and there's this bloody scab, and I'm about to lose it. He was looking at this, and he sees the scar, and he says, "Abe, should I take that off for you?" And I said, "How much is it going to cost?" And the Iranian doctor said, "Nothing, Abe. You've paid enough already." Now, isn't he a good doctor? So today is the last day I will see this number. And so from then on, Abe and I went to have breakfast, and he said, "Want to come on over to my house and have some schnapps," which in his case was Canadian club liquor. I said, "Well, Abe, I make it a point not to drink before 9 in the morning, but I'll make the exception for you." So he became my drinking buddy. Abe loved to drink, and we would go to Minion in the morning and then go over his house to play poker, which he always beat me at, and drink whiskey. And he would give me first little shot glasses, and then he brought out the juice glasses. And this went on for a year or so, and during that time, I began to ask Abe...
I'm just thankful that work was slow for you that year.
I began to ask him questions about his life, his boyhood growing up in Poland. And then he says, "You want to ask me about the Holocaust, don't you?" And I go, "Well, not yet. Let's just talk about..." Anyway, I found out all about his childhood. I found out about him growing up, and I found out about when the Nazis came to town. And how he was put into a work camp organized by the Jewish Judenrat who ran the town. They were working with the Nazis, with the Germans, dispensing the who would work and who would not work. Then the families were separated. So half of your family was sent somewhere while the other stayed in town. And Abe said, "Well, this is the way the Germans did it, because if you were away from part of your family, you wouldn't act up because you wouldn't know. If you did something wrong, something could happen to them. This is how they kept control of you." And then came the knock at his door, and everyone was taken to Auschwitz. And Abe said within the first 15 minutes, his sister was killed when she got off the train. His brother Tovia, who ran Minion in his little town, was sent to work the gas chambers with the members of the Judenrat. So they weren't even saved. And Abe ended up going to work. The amazing thing about Abe, well, there's so many amazing things about Abe's story. One of which is, without being a spoiler, he fell in love at Auschwitz. He fell in love with Auschwitz. At Auschwitz.
And not with Auschwitz.
Not with it, but with a woman on the woman's side of the camp.
Yeah.
And how he got over there is part of the story. And later on in the story, in my relationship with Abe, I said, "Who in your life, who are the greatest bastards you ever knew, the worst people you ever knew?" And he said, "Those guys on the Judenrat." He said, well, I thought you would say the commandant at Auschwitz who hit you in the head and left you for dead with the shovel. He goes, well, that guy was a bastard too.
Yeah.
But those Jews in our town, they had no business doing that. And making, they put him through a whole bunch of grief, hoping that it would save their
Right,
hides.
they thought they would save themselves.
Yeah, they thought they would save themselves.
And they separated themselves from the community. And I mean, it's interesting. We just read this yesterday in the Talmud as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah, which at the time that we're recording this podcast, it's just a week and a half away, when we were all going to come before the heavenly throne for judgment. And one of the things that you are judged most harshly for is turning your back on your community. And these guys, that's what they did. And Abe certainly never forgot that.
And I asked Abe, who were the greatest people you ever knew in your life? Drum roll. He says, my 2 German guards. They saved my life so many times. When the German commandant hit him in the head with a shovel and left him for dead, the guards, instead of taking him for execution, kept Abe in their room. And they gave him extra food. And they gave him clothing. They tried to find medicine for him. They tried to heal him. And Abe said they couldn't read. They couldn't do arithmetic. And they needed Abe because they were afraid in their position, if they weren't able to do their job of apportioning which potatoes went to which death camp, that they would be sent to the Russian front and it would be their death. And so Abe did arithmetic for them and helped them do their job and wrote love letters to their loves back home and to their mother and their family because they couldn't write.
And so he made that golden contact, just person to person.
Yes.
At the sort of the guys at the bottom of the food chain. They weren't even Nazis. They were just the German guards. And then he remembered them.
And the story continues to be remarkable, and I won't spoil that, but I will spoil this. You brought up something before, Sal, about, well, thank God I didn't have any work that year or two, and I had a high tolerance for early morning alcohol. But I finished writing the Abe story. I transcribed it and gave it to Abe for his approval, to make sure I didn't make any mistakes. And he read it, and he approved it, and then I recorded it for the Tobolowsky Files. This is a podcast called Good Day at Auschwitz. And I recorded it and gave it to Abe, and he had a party that night where he invited people over to listen to the story, his story. He had friends over and drinking. And I get a call from a friend of ours, another minion buddy, Sharon, who Abe spent his Shabbat. He would come over. He was kind of their honorary grandfather. And she was crying. And she said, found Abe this morning in bed. He had died in his sleep. And I had finished the story and was able to get it to him and record it to him the day before Abe passed away. And he was able to hear it.
Wow.
And that was absolutely incredible. And I also mention in the story.
It's such a blessing what you did for him, to have our story told. So many people never get that opportunity to know that their story matters, that it was heard, that it was communicated. And here we are, years later, talking about it again.
Well, history a lot of times doesn't mean anything unless it is attached to a story that does mean something.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it just tends to become a bunch of numbers.
And I want to talk more about you, but before we leave Abe, there's just one other detail from his story that I think is worth sharing. So many times we feel, do our prayers get answered? We wonder, do our prayers get answered? Do our prayers matter? There's many answers to this question. One of my favorite is that it's not what we pray for that really matters. God answers every prayer. Sometimes we don't like the answer. But what really matters is that we're praying, that we're spending that time on a regular basis connecting with the Creator and connecting with our souls. Because you can't lie in a conversation with God. He knows. And so you become much more truthful with yourself and you connect with what matters. That's what is really important about prayer. And I think you found that in your prayer practice when you took it on, when you reconnected with this faith of your ancestors and of your childhood. However, there are times when our prayers get answered, and sometimes in surprising ways. So while prayers are not always answered, a prayer book can be very helpful. And it was the pages of a prayer book that became the documents for Abe after the war ended.
It was, Bertolt Brecht said that whenever he wrote a character, he was trying to think of the gestus of the character, the physical gesture that describes what a character's life is. This was one of the facts that was most startling to me. Abe got out of Auschwitz. They sent him to another death camp from which he escaped. Then the war ended. And I said, Abe, I don't understand. All these Jews now are roaming the countryside. You have a lot of Nazi soldiers who killed a lot of Jews so they could change clothes with the murdered and say that they were the ones that were in the death camp so they would avoid any punishment. You had no money. You had no place to stay. You were far from home. How did you survive? And Abe says, the synagogues. And I said, oh, you didn't lose your faith? He goes, oh, I don't know. Some people lost their faith, some didn't. But me, we would go into the synagogues in the morning and we would hear news about who was where. I said,
this is before the internet, before everything was wired. You had to get news somewhere.
How could you get word back home to Poland that you were alive? And I've heard other people from this period of time saying, oh, it's amazing how mouth-to-mouth communication, how just the word spread that so-and-so survived. But I said, Abe, you had nothing at all. What did you do? And he goes, it was the prayer books. We would all go into the synagogue and rip a page out of the prayer book and carry it with us. And wherever we went in the town, we would hold up the page with the Hebrew writing on it, and they knew who we were, and they knew what we went through, and they would give us whatever we wanted. Wow. If we needed food, we would go into a store and hold the page, and they would give us bread. We would go into a clothing store, and they would give us new clothes. I said, Abe, what's the craziest thing you ever got with your page of prayers? He goes, a motorcycle. He says, I ended up dealing clothes between Italy and Germany. I would get ladies' blouses and take them to Italy, and Italy back up, back and forth. It was a very good time to be Abe. It's amazing. Amazing.
You're such a marvelous raconteur, and I think the reason I love reading your book, by the way, it's called My Adventures with God, and you have this wonderful tone throughout your book, where it's almost like you're simply reporting on what's happened in your life. You do interpret, but you have this wonderful, very open-handed, open-hearted attitude toward yourself and your life and the events of your life. And in that tone, you report to us these wonderful characters that you met and how they came into your life and what they meant to you. And you do that, and I will compare you a little bit to Hemingway. You do that in a very stripped-down language that allows us to just enter and be there and meet those people. And I think that your experience as an actor very much helps you do that because, what does an actor do? I mean, an actor studies characters. You have to understand a character before you can embody a character. Would you say that's true?
Not on television. But generally, ideally, yes. In fact, kind of what I said before, when I look at a part, I look for the gestus. I look for
yes, it's not reams of facts and analysis. It's that one moment that does it, right?
It's the one thing one true moment that opens that everything will open up from. I remember I had one acting teacher who said, all you need to ask when you're working on a role is, what is my greatest hope and what is my greatest fear? And those two questions create a tightrope that everything else springs from, if you could answer those two questions. So I found that to work a lot, and I try to do that in my work. One thing about my stripped-down style, a lot of that comes from too many school assemblies with my kids, going to the schools and having the teachers get up and hearing them talk. And it's like, oh my God, give me a break. It's like, I just want to say on this lovely night outside and the students are all here and they're so happy. And I'm going like, just get to the point. Get to the point. We all know we're here. We all know the kids are about to do some sort of show. So just be quiet. Just say, the students. That's all you had to do, you know. And so a lot of, and I have a wonderful editor at Simon & Schuster, Ben Lonan, and what Ben would tell me, I said, Ben, I'm afraid my book is too long. He says, Stephen, relax. You're rewriting the Bible. Just, you know, just
You
relax.
do have that 5-book structure.
I have the 5 books of Moses structure in the Bible, stories from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so I started writing, and then I started cutting. And I cut out every unnecessary adjective and adverb and everything and try to cut it down to a simple line as possible, because the reader is very smart and the reader knows exactly what they feel. And if you put 2 ideas together that either are similar or dissimilar, it will create an emotion in the reader's heart and mind, and you don't have to spell it out for them. They get it.
But not everyone, people can write simply, and it is certainly a merit to aspire to write simply. But that doesn't mean that they will have the same sense of wonder. You do have a sense of wonder. Things amaze you. Things please you. And you're reporting on that emotion. And I think that's what touches me so often. Now, when we go back to... Now, one thing, I think you've written other books, and that's why you don't report so much in this book on how you became an actor. You know, it's a given. You talk more about your relationships with your first partner and then with meeting Anne and with the craziness that was going on in Hollywood at the time. But you report less on the work. So let's just take a moment. What was that moment that you knew you would act?
I guess, in truth, I was 5 years old and I loved monsters. And I thought monsters were real. And I particularly loved Godzilla. And I thought if I could be an actor, I could meet Godzilla.
That's great.
I mean, that was the moment. Maybe that's the 5-year-old innocent that's writing this. I thought I could hang out with the Wolfman and Dracula, and they could be my buddies. And in a way, you know, now I've thought about this with a 67-year-old brain, and I'm thinking maybe a lot of things scared me when I was a child. And the idea of being friends with Godzilla, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, befriending what terrorized me, maybe was my way of dealing with fear. So I always put myself into plays because I thought that would be fun. And I did it when I was a child. I acted in school, in plays on the summer camp and playground. I won, I think, second best actor for Hansel and Gretel Pee Wee division. And I still wonder who was the guy who won first best actor. You know, but I won, but I got to kiss Marcia Housewright on the forehead and feed her strawberries, and believe me, that was hot when you're 5 years old. And then in school, I always acted in school plays, and I have thought like my father I would become a doctor, or like my uncles I would become a lawyer, but I ended up doing school plays in school and won Best Actor in the state of Texas for playing Talthybius, the crying Greek soldier in Trojan Women, a short 30-minute version of Trojan Women, where I come on with a baby on a shield. And I didn't have a great physique, but I had to come on in Greek like a Greek soldier. So I spent most of my preparation painting muscles on my body with paint. So this probably
That's commitment.
This probably was a real creep show. When I first walked on stage, all the guys in our high school whistled at me, right? And then I did my crying speech. I am not the man to do this. Some other without pity, not as I, ashamed, should be herald of messages such as this. Anyway, I won Best Actor in the state of Texas for that little speech. Let me tell you. So it worked.
You are hooked.
Yeah, So, and then I went to college, and I told my mother and father I was in pre-law. So I lied. Well, I didn't really lie, because you could be a drama major and it's still qualified as being in pre-law, because this is in Dallas, Texas.
Sure.
Anything you did, food preparation, was pre-law at SMU. I mean, anything you took was pre-law. So I kept going to drama classes, and Mom and Dad thought I was in pre-law. So, and then when here's a good one. When I was a sophomore, I had an adversary that I write about in my first book, a professor who tried to destroy my life and my soul and end my acting career and get me thrown out of college. And I combated her for 3 years. I was 19 years old, and having a grown-up attacking you and doing unbelievably outrageous, it was the deep state. Let me tell you, the deep state at SMU, she was so underhanded in what she did. I knew she was going to try to get me thrown out of school. And so, without anyone knowing, I went to one of my professors who liked me, who was our theater history teacher, because I was the only student who liked theater history. And I said, could I take my graduate test early, a year early? Is there any rule against doing that? And so I took my graduate test early. Because of her, I didn't get cast in any shows in college. So I went out and got my equity card in theater in Dallas and started doing plays for money. She really hated that. And then right before I was to graduate senior year, she had me kicked out of school. However, because I took my graduate test early and I had grades and I had all my work turned in, I not only graduated, I graduated first in my class at the SMU Drama School. First play I did on Broadway. She showed up. She showed up, and she came backstage and stuck her head in the door and said, "You're still no good." And I want to say, and Joan was in 3 movies. And one of them, she played a nurse with Richard Burton, which was very impressive to me. But all things will pass, including that. I learned at an early age that to be an actor, you have to take it on your own shoulders and you have to do what you have to do. So I would say my adversary, never underestimate the power of an adversary.
Both to give you that energy to overcome.
Yes.
But also, don't underestimate the power of an adversary that you have to fight.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And certainly to be a successful actor, you also have to be a good fighter. And a lot of people who were the stars at SMU, where I went to school, Southern Methodist University, Dallas, Texas, they fell by the wayside. They were stars in college, and they ended up not having the muscles to handle the horrors and rejection of this business. Now, of course, some of them did, like Powers Booth. He did okay. So did Kathy Bates. She graduated from our school, too.
So the horrors of rejection, that's something people have heard of. I mean, people know that if you're going to go for show business, you're going to get rejected a lot. And forget thick skin. I mean, you need metal armor plate, with all the rejection that comes your way. But what came out in the book that I didn't expect, especially knowing you, is that you did come to Hollywood and you did meet monsters, moral monsters.
And I still do. Yeah, it is. you know, there's almost nothing worse than a lie. And you learn that very early on. And I encountered so many people early in my career that see you as a new actor coming to Hollywood as just fodder for whatever it is. Now, in my first book, Dangerous Animals Club, I have a lot of early experiences of coming out here and the awfulness of that. But I had an experience that empowered me as well. I came out here and there was something going around called grids, and nobody knew what that was. There was some disease that was killing a lot of people, and everybody thought, at that time, they didn't know about AIDS. It was called grids. And I remember no one knew if it was a pandemic that was going to kill all the young people, but it was biblical in that it killed all the youngest. It killed men in the peak of their lives and leaving the very young and the very old to mourn for them. And during this period, when I first came out to Los Angeles, I went in to get a haircut from a very thin young man was cutting my hair, and he said, I'm doing this now. I'm dying. I have AIDS. And I'm dying. And I said, oh. He says, so I just want to do this for a little while more. I don't know. I'm afraid to go back home to Nebraska to my mother. I'm afraid she won't accept me. So I'm writing the story of my life. And I said, how's that coming? And he said, not well. He says, because I have all the beginning of the book, and I know how the book's going to end, but I have no middle chapters. And it's a story that I have in my first book called The Middle Chapters. And at that moment I met him, I realized I was lucky enough to be at the threshold of my middle chapters and to not take that moment for granted. So I was going to double down on my efforts in my love with Beth, who I came out to Los Angeles with, my girlfriend of many, many years at that time. I was going to pursue everything I loved, whether it be music, whether it be drama, whether it be finding really strong marijuana.
We're going to get to that.
Whatever I loved at that particular.
And even being a rock star, you pursued that for a bit.
Even pursuing rock stardom, because I had no idea who I was, except that I was this creature filled with passions and love, and I was going to fill my middle chapters. And
but what you didn't have was structure, and you didn't have a structured belief system the way you came to later. And so that made you a little bit vulnerable to pursuing whatever passion was in front of you. And when a person who was lacking that kind of structure suddenly got a little bit flush with cash, right? Beth had a big success, that brought some money into it. You got some roles, that brought some money into it. And now you went into, and this is what I meant by moral monsters, now you went into some dark places with this Hollywood crowd. We're talking about the 80s here. I mean, you got into the sex crowd.
Well, yeah. Well, there were, I mean, we had orgies at our house.
You had orgies at your house.
We had orgies at our house, and it was amazing because the first time people took off their clothes, first, they're a bunch of actors, so they're all talking about their agents and auditions. And a friend of mine was writing porno films under the name of Manny Hatton for Marilyn Chambers. And they were shooting some kind of thing like Naughty Nurses number 12 or something in our neighborhood. And so he called them up and invited them all over to our house. And these porno people came over and started having sex with everybody at our party. And it was so interesting. Here are these people eating chips and dip. Suddenly, these porn people come in. Everybody is like having sex in our backyard, in our pool, in our hot tub, all over the floor, everywhere. And I'm thinking like, oh, I am the, the master of ceremony. I'm the host of this orgy.
The balavaya, the master of the house.
And this is like, and then, you realize you have all sorts of problems, like unconsciousness. Like as a host, if someone was laying in my backyard unconscious, I would not know if they were just sleeping, having a little post-sexual snooze, or they hit their head on a sprinkler head. I didn't know if I needed to call.
There may have been drugs accompanying the sex.
But what was very interesting, from then on, people knew when they came to my house, the clothes came off right when they came in the front door. But they started talking about agents again. But they were naked, talking about agents and auditions. And
this says so much about the Hollywood acting crowd.
But we had all sorts of people. I remember Ricky Lee Jones was in our hot tub.
Oh, no names. No names.
Oh, well, I won't mention her. Ian McKellen, I won't mention him. But it was like a bat signal. I didn't know we didn't know any of these kind of people. Well, we knew Ricky Lee because we loved her singing, and we were huge fans of hers, and she lived down the road. But it was like someone put up a bat signal that said, "It's happening at Tobolowsky's house. Better show up now." And it was incredible. I remember one really unfortunate moment was when my mother came out to visit Los Angeles, and she had not visited Beth and me in Los Angeles because, Beth and I were not married, and so she thought, our lives were coated in sin, which I guess at this point they were.
Mom had a good instinct there.
Yeah, Mom had a good instinct. So anyway, she was just going to come out and visit us for a couple days, and I had forgotten that we had a scheduled party for that night when Mom was there. So I introduced everyone to my mother when they walked in the door, certain that this would be enough of a buzzkill and everybody would behave themselves. And everybody sat around, and it was really nice. It was kind of like Bonnie Gross and NPR in the morning. It was like, "Hi, Mrs. Tobolowsky, well, how's everything?" And everybody was very nice and respectful. And I had all my bases covered except for one, me. So everybody's sitting around my mother having a great time, asking Mrs. Tobolowsky how everything's going in Dallas, and I realized I had a vial of cocaine in my upper breast pocket of my jacket. And I bring up in the book that this is one of the problems of when you buy cocaine, when you're high on cocaine, is that you forget where you put your cocaine. So I actually hadn't used cocaine in quite a while, but I go like, well, damn, I got to get rid of this. So I go, excuse myself to the bathroom and throw that cocaine in the trash. And then I think, this could be a problem, because if anyone goes through my trash and finds this cocaine, it's against the law, and they could file a citizen's arrest against me.
So right here, this is the brilliance of the Yetzer Hara.
Yeah, so
it starts by saying, you might hurt somebody else with that cocaine you threw away.
So I pulled it out, and I said, you know what? I'm going to hide it here with all my expired antibiotics in the mirror, the bathroom mirror, behind the bathroom mirror. I thought, someone's going to find that. The best thing to do is just to pour this stuff down the sink, just wash it away, and then I will be able to, in this horrible part of my life, this addiction part of my life, away. But before I do that,
the good inclination had a moment, and the evil inclination came back hard.
I think I'm just going to have a bump or two, because you have two nostrils, and so you have to do cocaine by twos. And so I had done just enough to where I look in the mirror, I go, "What are you doing, Stephen? Your mother is here from California. What are you doing?" So I poured the rest of the cocaine away. I go back into the party, and everybody could see from my new energy what I had done. And so they figured, oh, So it's okay to get high, even with Mrs. Tobolowsky here. So they all start going to different bathrooms throughout the house, and they start doing what they want to do. Then people start taking off their clothes. Then the party begins, and I am steering my mother through the house, trying to avoid scenes of spontaneous copulation. And I'm moving her outside, and we sit alone on a little bench outside. And Mom goes, "Stephen, I like your friends so much. They all seem so happy." And I say, "Well, they are happy most of the time." And then my mother grabbed my hand hard and said, "Stephen, are you happy?" And I go, "Well, Mom, Stephen, are you happy?" And I said, I try to be." She said, "You should be. Beth is lovely. This is a beautiful home. There's so much nature here. But I want you to know that no matter where you go or what you do, your life is your life." And then at that point, there were some screams coming from the backyard, and Mom rolled her eyes and said, "As for the rest of it, it's just a crazy, mixed-up world." And I think sitting on the porch with Mom, laying a little truth on me, it was so true that my life is my life. And the good and bad voices fighting for control of my head and my heart and my soul, those voices continue. But when you know that all adds up, there's no freebies. It all goes into who you are, making up who you are. It had a great corrective effect. In fact, I never got to tell my mother before she passed away that was probably the singular most corrective moment in my life.
Yeah.
Was her holding my hand on the front porch of that house.
It's so instructive because one would have to say that you had reached, a real peak, a summit. If pleasure-seeking is what life is about, you had summited, probably Everest. If not Everest, Annapurna, right? But, you're a well-known Hollywood actor, surrounded by celebrities, having orgies, great drugs. For pure pleasure-seeking, you got there. And what did it amount to? What did it give you? In the eyes of your mom, nothing.
And I would even throw this out there, and I don't know if it's because now I'm 67, but I look back and I see that period of time fraught with anxiety rather than pleasure.
Yeah.
The engine of pleasure is often mistaken for the engine of anxiety. And as soon as you do the first hit of Coke, you're going like, "Oh my God, I don't want the last hit to come." And the thing everybody knows who parties is the party is over syndrome when the sun comes up.
Yeah.
You don't want the beginning of a new day to bring you misery. That's no way to live. So I would argue with the fact that it was really pleasure-seeking. I think we were creating an intoxicating form of hell. And the real pleasure...
That's its true nature.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. And the pleasures I have now are way beyond any of those of intoxication.
But what a lesson from Mrs. Tobolowsky, because as you're telling that story, I'm imagining myself as a parent, and so often I lecture, I'm that dad who lectures. And I hate to be lectured, so I always try to make my lectures not lectures in a kind of conversational way, just laying the truths out before my kids. But to lay a truth out means you need point A, B, and C to establish the elements of the truth, and it just turns into a lecture. And here was your mom not saying, "Stephen, I saw A, B, and C, and that tells me that in your life E, F, and G are happening." None of that. She just went with, "Are you happy?" and let you realize it for yourself.
She was a genius in so many ways. She was not, I don't think she was schooled. She loved to read, but I think my mother was a spiritual genius, not a book genius, but she knew the human heart, and the way you put that is exactly right. And I never really put that together before, is that my mother had no judgment toward me, that what I was doing was wrong. She put it in a much simpler way. Is this what you want your life to be? Are you happy? It's a much clearer road to go like, no, not at all. And it's guided me.
Let's talk for a second about your wife's father, Bill, because it was just this great piece of advice, and it led right into a lesson from the Talmud. You want to tell that story about when you called Bill to ask for advice?
Anne is Jewish now. She converted, which was a shocker. That story's in the book too.
She did not convert to marry you.
No, she did not convert to marry me. We were together for many, many years. And then while I was working one day, I was busy working. She wanted to take some night course, and I didn't even ask her what it was. And then 4 months later, she came down and said, Stephen, today I'm converting to Judaism. Will you be one of my witnesses? And it was nothing I ever thought would happen or aspired to, but it turned me into a pool of tears in the kitchen. But Anne grew up kind of Episcopal Baptist witch. She was kind of this amalgam in Georgia. Her father was Baptist, originally because all of his golf buddies were members of the Baptist church, so that's where he went. But Bill ended up going to Bible study and loving the Bible, and was the perfect portrait of the power of Christianity. Bill was truthful. Bill was forgiving. Bill was honest. And so I remember one day I had a problem with one of my agents. They had done something that was a small lie that I knew was a lie. And instead of calling my father, I called Bill, my father-in-law. And he said, well, Steve, why are you calling me for? And I said, well, Bill, my dad is a doctor, and he's not really a businessman, but this is a business question. I'm working with someone now, and they presented something to me, and I know that there's a bit of a lie in there. And I don't really know how to deal with it. I don't know if I should just let it go because he's part of a much larger group of people. And if I bring it up, it could cause business problems for me with everything. He goes, Steve, the only question you need to ask is the person I'm working with honest in business? Because, Stephen, if he is not, you will never be able to trust what he says about anything. And it was only later that I discovered, when I began reading the Talmud, that is the first thing God asks you in one of the Talmudic, one of the, I even forget, I think it's in Shabbat somewhere. I'm not sure. One of the first thing God asks you is not, were you a good man? Were you charitable? But
right, that's what your instinct would say.
Yeah.
Were you good? Were you kind? That's what they'll ask you when you reach heaven.
It's, were you honest in business?
Yeah.
Wow. And Bill was always a seat of Talmudic wisdom. I remember, my wife and I, we had rough patches in our marriage. And it caused Bill and Elizabeth, Anne's mother, all sorts of pain, and like, are you two going to be able to patch it up? Are you two going to be able to go on? Are you going to divorce? What's going to happen? I mean, Anne and I filed for divorce, I think, 3 times. We're married twice. We never got unmarried. We were married by a justice of the peace some 30 years ago. And then after Anne converted to Judaism, she wanted to be married with a Jewish ceremony in our yard with our rabbi and cantor. So we had a second marriage. And along the way, we tried to divorce one another and murder one another probably several times, but 3 times. So Bill, Elizabeth had, Ann's mother had Alzheimer's, and Bill had an incurable disease. But he kept taking treatments to stay alive so he could be a caregiver to Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And then when Elizabeth passed away that week, Bill said, I'm not taking the treatments anymore. Elizabeth's gone, and I can't do this anymore. And he called us to say he was stopping his treatment, which meant he would be gone by the end of the week. He would. That's the way that gets at that point in time. And so I talked to Bill the day before he died. I called him up and I said, Bill, I want to thank you for your counsel in our life together. And I want you to know that I love your daughter very, very much. And I will always take care of her until the day she dies. And you do not have to worry about that. And Bill said, well, Steve, that's about the best news I'm going to hear today. I've heard so much bad news lately. When I hear good news, it's so rare it scares me. But this is good news, and I appreciate that, son. Thank you so much. And Bill passed away the next day. So I guess I learned a little bit from my mother, who also died of Alzheimer's, is that there comes a time when you realize it's too late to say goodbye properly.
Yeah.
And it's important to say you love someone frequently in the moment, and it's important when you're leaving someone to say goodbye properly.
Yes.
And what they mean to you.
Yes.
Yeah,
I perhaps for the same reason, my mom has dementia. And my father, who, because his father died young, always thought he would die young. And it was just a given to him that, my mom, who comes from people who live a long time, would end up taking care of him. But now he takes care of her. And it has led him to take better care of his health than he ever did before, because he has to outlive her. That is his goal. And in watching them interact, it definitely became very important to me to know that tomorrow is now promised. And every time I leave the house to say goodbye to the kids, and if I go on a trip, I say to both kids, take care of your mom, take care of each other. And maybe they think I'm morose or trying to make heavy moments out of what should be simple day-to-day moments. It's worth having a little bit of heaviness in your day-to-day life. Make it about joy, but acknowledge that tomorrow's not given, and you have to say these things frequently.
It's in the Talmud, I was amazed at the number of interpretations that are in there about breaking the glass at a wedding. The one I always heard was, well, it stands for Jerusalem, like for Tisha B'Av, the fall of the.
We must remember, no matter even on our most joyful day, the day we're married, we have to remember our sadness that we've lost the temple, we've lost the ancient city of Jerusalem as it was then.
And there was one little story in the Talmud that the people are having a big celebration, and the father, I believe it was the father, gets a glass and smashes it on the ground and says, this is not only a joyous day, but this is a day of holiness. And it's a day to be sanctified. And do not just assume that this is only a day for celebration. And one of the rabbis said that this is where the breaking of the glass at the wedding came just from an irate father saying, people, this is a holy day, not just, and I love that. I love that.
In other words, that a wedding day is a day that you undertake responsibilities. It's not just about drinking and partying and celebrating.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's, I remember when Ann and I got married, Justice of the Peace in Memphis, Tennessee. I was doing Great Balls of Fire, and we didn't know what to do for our honeymoon. Exactly. We were at the Radisson Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. And we didn't want to have dinner at the Radisson, a big thunderstorm outside. And I said, well, what do you feel like? And she said, well, how about pizza? And I said, well, there's a Domino's Pizza 4 blocks away. Hey, I'll just... So I called up Domino's, and I said, baby, what kind of pizza she wants? She says, well, jalapeno pizza is good. I said, so we want jalapeno pizza, please. And he says, well, you know, with the 3 tornadoes in town, we don't guarantee the 30-minute delivery or free pizza. He goes, oh, that's okay. You know, I'll come by and pick it up. And somehow the 3 tornadoes in town went in one ear and out the other. So I'm at the hotel. I said, baby, I'm going to go pick up the pizza. I pull my car out from under the underground garage, and there's a tree moving across the road. And then my car starts swerving back and forth, and it lifts off the ground and down again. I thought, oh, my God. And I'm going like 1 mile an hour. Now, the pizza
Wait, you
place,
kept going?
I kept going.
It's pizza after all.
4 blocks away. The pizza's 4 blocks away. And I am going really about 2 miles an hour, and there's debris fields flying. I mean, it was like the Weather Channel, you know, storm chasers, but I'm the idiot driving to get a pizza. I get to the pizza place an hour later, and the guy said, oh, I can't believe you made it here with the storm outside and the hail and everything. I can't believe you made it here. I said, yeah. He said, well, the pizza's cold now. I said, it's okay. I just got to get in the car. I got to get back. So I start back again with the hailstorm and the winds. So 2 hours later, I come back with the cold, wet pizza, car dented from hail, swab all the room. I come up, I enter our hotel room, and Anne is in tears, and she runs to my arms and throws herself into my arms, and she says, oh my God, I thought you had left me. I thought you were gone. I thought you had second thoughts and just left. And I said, no, baby, here's the pizza for you. I said, I went to get the pizza for you, jalapeno pizza. And so now, on our anniversary, we always have jalapeno pizza in honor of the trip in which Anne thought I had left us forever and had come back.
That is the most romantic jalapeno pizza story I have ever heard.
It could be the only jalapeno pizza story you heard, but it's, yeah, jalapeno pizza and love together. Yeah.
It's so, I mean, honestly, a jalapeno pizza, as told by Stephen Tobolowsky, is more romantic than a diamond ring. It is. Of course it is, because it's about what's
more
real.
dangerous.
Just before we move on from eating and you and Anne, when you came to a Shabbos dinner at our house a while back, you brought us a pot of honey. And we love honey, and my kids love honey, and we love having honey with our challah. And this honey didn't come from the supermarket.
No.
Where did that honey come from?
My lunatic wife, Anne, she gets all these wild ideas, so she wanted to be a beekeeper. So we have two hives now in our backyard, and we have a jar of honey for you guys.
Oh.
So I'll bring it to you before the holidays.
Nina just slipped me a note. She wanted me to make sure to say on mic, it is the best honey we've ever had.
Well, this next, because you never know with the bees. You learn so much about life from bees. Now, I'm not going to go into all the things we learned about life, but one thing I know is every vat of honey we harvest is completely different depending upon what the bees eat.
Yeah.
So the honey we have for you guys is so dark and brown and tastes almost like caramel.
Wow.
It is going to be such a Rosh Hashanah treat. But, yeah, I will bring you honey. You will love this. So this year we only had about 50 pounds of honey, but last year we had 100.
Only 50.
We had 150, and Anne made booze out of some of it. She made mead out of it, and it will put you, can you say ass in a podcast? It will put you on your booty.
You put the ass in podcast?
Yes. It will put you down. And you take a little bit of it, and you go like, well, this is just very nice. It's like a honey liqueur. Wait 5 minutes. And don't plan on using any machinery for at least 2-3 hours. I mean, it is like amazing. But I'll bring you a little bit of mead too, and you could have it as a
I look forward to trying
Shabbat
that.
drink.
No, but what do you learn from bees? I mean, because it's interesting. We see bees, and for most people, it's just the solo soldier who's going to hurt me. Right?
Soldieress.
Soldieress. That's right. They're females, and we fear the bee. But when you have thousands of bees living with you and working for you, it's a different thing. And now you watch their movements, right? Remember Ann talking about the movements of the bees?
Yeah, you could learn so much. First of all, know that the average bee only lives like 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The queen lives 3 to 5 years, but the average worker bee, they're all female, except the drones. The drones, they're about 100, 200 drones to a big hive, and they do nothing but like drink and watch television. I mean, that's all they do is watch the game. And they have little screens in there, too. They do nothing.
Like the male lion. He doesn't do much either.
They do nothing. But the little bit, when the bee, out of the 6 weeks of their life, the bee spends about 4 of those weeks in the hive, doing chores in the hive, feeding the young, cleaning the hive, making sure it's spotless, killing parasites that come in the hive. The only time you see a bee is at the end of their life. They exit, and they are the foragers at the very tail end of their life. And when a new group of foragers come out of the hive, they form a kind of tornado above the hive as they see where their place is in the world in relationship to the sun. And then they are able to forage anywhere within 5 miles and always find their way back home. And what we've done is, bees are very smart. So we have 2 hives now, and we have a pay. We've written a Hebrew script pay on one of the top of the hives. On the other one, as soon as we get the next coat of paint on, we're either going to do an olive or a shin, something that looks completely different, because bees can read, and they know what their address is. So even though you have the hives next to one another, they will see those symbols and know where to go.
Wow.
So we can tell changes in the weather a day or so ahead of time. We could tell if a heat wave's going to come in by if the bees beard on their front porch. We could tell if it's going to rain by how high or low they fly. We could tell all sorts of things, and they never bother you. When a bee's going to sting you, you don't want a bee to sting you, because they also put a chemical. The reason that stinger stays in you is that it puts out a pheromone signal to other bees saying, get this thing, kill this thing. So it's putting out a radio wave saying, come get me. So you don't want a bee to sting you. But I go out there all the time when I have scripts. I sit out by the beehive. I read. They're not interested in me because I'm not a flower. I'm not nectar.
And you're not presenting a threat.
No.
But they very much have that hive mind, and our very individualism prizing society is perhaps the most critical of hive mind. Oh, I would never be part of a hive mind, Yet the bees know that they're living for something, right? They are part of something that is greater than themselves, and they serve that. They receive wisdom from their elders. They pass it on to their youth so that the hive can survive and prosper.
In the form of kind of pheromones.
Yeah.
Now, science has just done an experiment with bees, and they found out the bees are far more advanced than a lot of even mammals, in that bees, arithmetically, know that there is a value to 0. Whereas when they've done experiments with other mammals, they just think of 0 as a nothing, as nothing there, like they'll put
the difference
food,
between something and nothing.
the difference between something and nothing. But bees know negative numbers. They know that there is less than nothing. And so they know nothing can be a positive at times. For example, it guides them when there is no nectar. When there's no nectar in their environment, the queen realizes it's best not to lay, that is better than it is a positive not to lay, because you save all that energy instead of laying eggs for a brood that will die because there's no nectar, which is less than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So the bees understand this is a time to fast.
Okay.
This is a time to rest. This is a time we will replenish and restore. It's not nothing. It's something. It's just something that has no visible value.
And they learn that lesson because they're part of a group, right?
Yes.
Because they're part of this larger enterprise. And, one of the most touching things about your book for me is that in reconnecting with Judaism, in reconnecting with your faith, in finding faith, in working for faith, in working for your people and for God, you found something in your life that was not there before. And that is uncommon in Hollywood. I mean, this is not it's not a town that's all about faith. That's an understatement.
Yeah, I think it's, first of all, you have to understand that a lot of people who are involved in show business are very project-oriented. And a lot of times they carry their pasts with them, but they keep them close to the vest. I'm working now on One Day at a Time, a splendid show, absolutely wonderful show with Norman Lear. And Norman and I, Norman's like 95 now, 90s, we've had some amazing conversations about Judaism and his Jewish upbringing and the kind of problems he had in his life. And we're able to share on that level. But I have found that people don't talk that much about what is most personal to them unless it's politics.
Yeah, that they're happy to talk about.
They're happy to talk about politics.
Assuming you agree with them.
And it's like, I think, again, people have often asked me, they said, what is the most important line in the Torah to you? And that changes throughout your life. Well, for me, right now, for the last 3 years, and then there came a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going whenever I hear people talking about politics, that idea comes to my head. Just wait, because whatever you think is now, it ain't going to be now, because soon there will come a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph.
Yeah.
The worm always turns. And that's why I tried. I don't talk about that. When I'm on the set, I usually try to tell Jewish stories, which people find refreshing.
Because they have a timeless quality, because they're about values, not about the fad that we're so obsessed with today, right? These stories are forever. And you said it's a company town, but that's project-oriented. I mean, I'm a director, Nina and I are writers, and you see that so much in this town. People don't realize what an impact it has on our social structure, right? It's a company town, but normally a company town means that there's one company that dominates the town, and everybody works for that company, and the company's always there. You can count on the company always being there. Hollywood is a company town in the sense that every movie is a new company. Not just a new company of people, but even a new financial company, a new author of the paycheck, a new everything. And if something goes wrong in this project, okay, so in a few weeks we'll have a new project. There'll be a new company of people. And because of that ephemeral social structure that surrounds us, people keep their cards close to the vest, as you say, but also they just think, well, if I burn my bridges with this group of people, it won't matter. I'll have a new group of people soon enough. And they can behave abominably. They don't have this sense of eternal values, of real values that matter. And there's so many people here that if they are asked when they get to the next world, were you honest in your business dealings?
Well, they would say, hey, I was doing what I was told. I was just working on the project. You would have done the same thing if it were me.
I was doing what everybody around me was doing.
I remember I was doing Memoirs of an Invisible Man, right? John Carpenter directed that. Chevy Chase was in that movie. They overpaid me. It was a period of, I think I was making $5,000 a week, which believe me, we loved that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't princely. You know, I was making $5,000 a week for the film, and they overpaid me. They paid me a week too much.
And just so people understand, when we make a nice big number per week, we're not going to work every week that year.
Yes, and also your agent is getting 10%, a manager's getting 10%,
Right.
the government's getting like, from 30 to 50%.
And then it's got to keep us going when we're drinking Canadian Club with
Yeah,
Abe for
you
the
got
next 6 months.
Usually in Hollywood are the most frugal people in the world, but they overpaid me.
Right.
So Ann said, Stephen, you got to call the accounting office. We can't keep this money because eventually it's going to come back. The government or somebody is going to see we were overpaid and we will get penalized. We have to do this. So I called the production office and I said, I need to talk to someone about my check. So they sent me over there and they said, well, Darlene is responsible for the books of Invisible Man. So she's at lunch now. Maybe if you could call when Darlene comes in. I go, oh, okay, sure. So I called that afternoon. Darlene has left early. She had a dental problem. I think maybe call tomorrow morning and see if everything's okay. Call the next. Darlene had a root canal. She's not coming in today. Why don't you give a try in another couple days? Call another couple days. Sorry you missed Darlene. She's on vacation. She went to the Bahamas. She'll be back in 3 weeks. Why don't you give her a call then? So I'm beginning to get an idea that this Darlene is like a fictional quality, like a hobbit or something. So anyway, 3 weeks later, I call back and I said, listen, is Darlene in? I need to talk to her about my check. And they go, yeah, let me put you through to Darlene. Put me through. And Darlene goes, oh, if you wanted to talk about your check for Invisible Man, I am so sorry, but I've closed the books on that production and nothing can be done about it. And I go, well, that's a shame because you overpaid me $5,000. Pause on the phone. And then Darlene goes, well, sometimes you get the bear and sometimes the bear gets you.
So the runaround is standard operating procedure when people call to talk about a check because the assumption is they're looking to get more money.
Yeah. And Darlene was just, she probably didn't even have a root canal. There were probably multiple lies in that story. And she probably didn't even go to the Bahamas.
Yeah.
I've been to the Bahamas. The Bahamas is not a picnic. That is rough sailing, let me tell you.
You know where this comes up a lot, and I do think that my faith plays a part in it, for sure. Very often, more often than you would think, you order something from Amazon, and you get 2 of them. I don't know if this happens to you. It's happened to me repeatedly. So I contact Amazon and say, you've sent me 2 of these things. And I think it surprises them because I think most people don't make that call. And I just feel I don't want this to weigh on me. I'm an honest person. I prize honesty. And I didn't pay for the second one. And I want to give it back to you. Now, generally, they will say, oh, yeah, okay, keep it. It's more expensive and more trouble for us to send you a box to send it back. But thank you for trying. It also happened when we ordered our dining room chairs. We thought to order 6 chairs, and they sent us 12. Now, this was a much bigger thing. They were not the most expensive chairs in the world, but they're dining chairs, and you can pay good money for dining chairs.
Yes.
And I said, Nina, this is great. We should have ordered 12 in the first place because now we're more set for the dinner party, right? When wonderful, charming people come. He said, oh, we don't really need 12. We'll just return them. And I called up. I said, well, you sent us double the chairs. I'd like to pay for them and keep them, and I will convince my wife that this is a good idea later. And again, they were surprised. I mean, it's amazing that they're surprised. It is not standard for people who, feel that they've finally gotten a little bit of good luck after all the bad luck that maybe they've had and all the times they've been ripped off in this world, that when sometimes you get the bear and sometimes the bear gets you. It seems to be that for a lot of people in this world, oh yeah, well, this is the kind of good luck that makes up for all the bad luck you've had. And so don't rock the boat, kid. But I think that when we go out of our way to return the thing that is not rightfully ours, I think we're engaging in holy work, and there's a deep satisfaction that comes from it.
I think it's an important thing to do. I just shot a Goldberg spinoff thing this week, a couple days ago, Schooled, and I walked off the set with my watch, with the prop watch I had, and I said, I have to return this watch, and they said, well, we closed down production until October.
Darlene says the books are closed.
We closed down production. And I called my manager. I said, I got to do something, get rid of this watch, because I'll end up keeping it here, and it's not mine. Someone owns this watch. So I drove over to Sony, and I said, where is the Goldberg's office? Where's the Schooled office? They said, well, they're all gone. They're on hiatus now. They're all gone. I said, well, where's the office? And maybe I could somehow leave the watch. So I walk up to the office and run into Adam Goldberg.
Okay.
The head of the whole damn show. The head writer. He goes, what are you doing here? I said, Adam, I stole this watch from you from the set yesterday and on Schooled. And he said, well, give it to me. Give it to me. I'll take it. So I ended up with a chance meeting with the man himself, all because I returned this watch.
Yes.
So maybe he won't sue me.
And this is a big mitzvah. It's a big commandment. To return stolen property, to return lost property, to go out of your way. It recently happened that somebody abandoned 2 suitcases on our street, right across the street from my house. One was an empty camera case, and one was a woman's carry-on, like a rollerboard suitcase. And it was so strange. And then nobody did anything about it. I asked my neighbors, "Is it yours?" No, we just saw it sitting out there all day, and it just sat out there for hours. And finally, I said, "All right, I'm going to undertake to see if I can return the lost property." And there was no identifying tag, so I opened the suitcase, and I found a woman's degree, a college degree. Like she had just graduated from she had just received a Master of Science in Finance from a major East Coast university. I thought, this is very strange. Who would lose their degree having just graduated? Who would leave their suitcase out here? It must have been stolen. Is this woman, did foul play get her? Is she in danger? And so we proceeded to investigate, and we found her on Instagram, and her name was Chinese, and it was hard to track her down. A lot of the Instagram comments were in Chinese. And, actually, I won't tell the ending of this story because I think we're going to make a movie out of this.
No! I thought I was watching Forensic Files.
Okay, I will say she survived. She had gone back to China. And I think this is actually another Talmudic principle that if you despair of ever recovering the property, then it becomes ownerless. And I said, well, it's not ownerless. I turned it into LAPD because I was afraid for your safety. And she said, wow, I never thought I would get it back. It was stolen from the trunk of my car in Hollywood. And I guess that empty camera gear case was probably stolen from some cinematographer's trunk. And then the thief abandoned it on our street. But why our street? You'd think you'd abandon that stuff in a dumpster somewhere. So the end of the story, as it really happened, was not the most interesting thing. But in the movie version,
yes,
Nina and I are going to become the sleuths.
Yeah, figure it out.
Looking at her Instagram and wondering, who took these nice pictures of her? Is the photographer some kind of serial killer or something like that?
I remember we were in Seattle. I was going to do a book event in Seattle and picked up my suitcase off of the line with Ann, went over to the hotel. Ann opened it up, said, this isn't our suitcase. You took the wrong suitcase. And then we had to think, well, that means somebody has our suitcase because they look exactly the same. And Ann found the girl whose suitcase I stole, and she was in a hotel about 6 blocks away from our hotel. So we met. We exchanged suitcases, and we've become friends ever since. And I take a look at what was the friendship based on? Was it based on the fact of mistaken luggage of my? Not really. It was based on the kind of the commonality of saying, like, in this life, there are going to be a lot of mistakes. But when you try to right the wrongs in whatever little way you can, it's kind of funny and kind of fun, and you're somebody I could trust. And so there's a bond of trust. We have with this girl now. We see her when we go to Seattle. I still have no idea what she does, except I know what she wears.
And in the end, I mean, maybe it's the best that we can hope for, that we find a few people along the way that we can trust, that we can learn from and learn with, and make these connections.
Mm-hmm. I have one tiny story that I don't think you know from the book.
Oh.
Since you read the book, something that when you write a book, what people don't know is people come from all over the world and connect with you in some way because they read the book and something happened. So in my book, I have a series of stories about the rabbi who brought me back to Judaism, Rabbi Meyer Schimmel at Beth Meir. So I'm doing the book tour this year, and I get a call from a realtor friend of mine, Lou Wolf, and he says, Debbie is trying to get a hold. I didn't know Debbie, whatever. And it was Debbie's married name. She was Rabbi Schimmel's oldest daughter. Mm. And she got my book not knowing that there was anything about her father in the book. And she read the book and she said, Stephen, this is such a love letter. You've written to my father. She says, I bought a case of the books. I'm giving them out to everybody. It's on my mantelpiece. But I want you to know you don't know the end of the story. And I go, what, Debbie? She says, near the end of Dad's life, he had dementia. And so Ken and I, her husband, Ken, brought the rabbi into their home and put him into the back bedroom with a baby monitor so they could listen to him at night. And Stephen.
To make sure he's okay.
To make sure he's okay. So Ken and I are in our bed one night and we hear talking coming from the rabbi's room. So I turn up the monitor and listen. And she goes, Stephen, he was talking to God. He was talking to God about you. And I go, what? She said, I got a pad and a pencil, and I started writing down everything he was saying. He's saying, Dear God, please help Stephen Tobolowsky. He has such sorrows in his heart. I know he's a good man, and I know you'll listen to me when I tell you, do what you can to help him and bring him peace and bring him happiness. And I said, this was before Dad died. So to let you know the love you had for him, he had that love for you. And I said, Debbie, next time you talk to your dad, tell him the prayer worked. Mm. But these are the kind of things that happen when you write a book. Like you get these stories that kind of come from the ether.
That's such a beautiful lesson. When we pray for ourselves, okay, first of all, that we're biased, and we don't really know what's best for us, and there's reasons for God to say no in the things we ask for ourselves. When we pray for others, it's very powerful, and the Talmud actually teaches that those are the most powerful prayers, And so, on the one hand, what a chutzpah that Rabbi Schimmel said, "Well, I know you'll listen to me," and I think he knew that. Not because he was a very humble man, right? I never had the pleasure of meeting him, although I believe I know him because of your book. And I know that he was not an arrogant man and didn't think, well, because I've done so much holy work in my life, you'll listen to me, God.
No.
It's because he knew that what he was asking for in this case, would receive a positive answer because he knew you and the journey that you were on, and he could look into your life and say, God, this is a guy you want to help.
He's a lot like you in that he saw Judaism as not as a source of rules and a source of what, but as a source of constant joy. And like, when we have a dinner at your place, it's as joyful as you could get. And Rabbi Shimmel's one of those guys that knew so much about Judaism. And like those bees, he was able to turn that information into honey. And it was, his message was always so sweet and always so life-affirming and always life-changing because of that.
Stephen, I want to thank you so much for coming in today. It's been a wonderful experience, reliving some of these stories with you, exploring a bit. I always say that a great conversation is one in which both participants learn something that neither knew before. And I feel that whenever we get together and talk, it's like that.
Yes.
So thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much, Sal.
We're reaching along a wide table. Thank you for coming in, Stephen.
Pleasure.